Hi guys, welcome back. Let's see, we're just going to wrap up with session 4, and we have Taylor Corbett who's going to be the moderator for this session. She is a very talented digital media specialist at AE2S in Grand Forks. She is passionate about helping communities, counties, and other organizations tell their story, educate the public, and create compelling messages. She specializes in digital and social media. Taylor is a co-chair of the Northwest chapter of NDPC Valley Marcom and serves as president of the Greater Grand Forks Young Professionals and volunteers with Special Olympics. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to session 4 with the very talented Zach Addison. He will be talking about Graphic Design 101, tips and tricks for effective visual communication. Zach is a marketing coordinator at AE2S in Grand Forks. He's a graduate from the University of North Dakota with a BS in graphic design technology. Zach has a talent for visual communication and a passion for helping others achieve their branding goals on projects ranging from public health initiatives to billion-dollar water projects. Zach also has designed the logo for the Valley Marcom Group in Grand Forks.
Must be my cue. All right, well, thank you, Taylor, and thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you NDPC for having me present. Like Taylor said, we're going to go over some tips and tricks for effective visual communication. So just a quick background about me. I was born, raised, and currently still reside in Grand Forks, North Dakota. A bit of a lifer. It's way cooler than you think. That'll come up later. So just a little precursor to some other stuff. I'm also very visual, much like the 65% of people that relate to that. You know, we're visual thinkers, and it's just those visuals help us along. So much so that I often tend to forget words or numbers, especially. It's actually kind of embarrassing sometimes with the numbers. But yeah, any sort of like graphic to go with that totally helps me. So yeah. So I work at AE2S Communications as a marketing coordinator. AE2S Communications is unique in that it is a full service marketing and communications firm housed within an engineering firm that goes by AE2S. Their main focus is water, but they do all sorts of projects. So AE2S Communications, well, our work really has a whole bunch of different facets. We have our engineering side and all of our affiliated companies. Then we have, you know, our external clients for some of those water projects and other engineering projects. And then we have our own communications projects as well. And we help out just a variety of clients from economic development entities to public health initiatives and just everything in between. And we have a really diverse team of designers, web designers, and developers, writers, marketers, communications specialists, videographers, and photographers, just a very rounded, diverse team to work with. So to get into the bulk of the presentation, we have to ask ourselves, what is graphic design? And kind of a bit of a cheeky response is the art of making things pretty. And I don't know how many times I've gotten that request from clients or just internally through working with engineers and whatever that maybe don't understand the aesthetics behind things. How many times I've gotten, can you just make this pretty? And you kind of want to reach out and shake someone a little bit through the screen. But it kind of devalues graphic designers, because what we really do is use strategy and creativity. And by strategy, I really mean like the whole process from start to finish. You really want to sit down and think about, who's my client, who's my focus, what's the messaging behind this design. And that's really for everything from small, like one social media post to, like a 500-page document with different graphics in it. So no matter the scale of the project, you really want to sit down and think about that strategically. And I just included a quote from Stephen Heller from his book, Design Cult. Excuse me. And in it, he asks, do you make things look nice? Do you spend more time worrying about nuance and aesthetic than substance and meaning? Do you fiddle with style while ignoring the big picture? If your answers are yes, yes, or yes, you're a decorator. And in his book, he goes into detail about the difference between being a designer and being a decorator. And you can kind of equate that to like someone coming into your house and just slapping a coat of paint on your interior walls and calling it good. That would be like a decorator. Whereas if you have someone come in and, you know, think like, oh, we could knock down this wall and the flow would be better, or we could, you know, do something a little bit more creative and really think about the strategy behind, you know, the flow of your house and stuff like that, you really end up with a much better end result product that is a much better like bang for your buck. It might cost a little bit more to, you know, sit down and think about that strategically, but you definitely want to. So another question I want to ask is, who benefits from today's presentation? And the simple answer is everyone. I mean, graphic designers, sure, you know, I'm hoping you come away from this with a few, you know, tips and tricks on how to be a little bit more effective and efficient, but even people who maybe don't design all day every day, or just dabble a little bit, or even if you just work alongside of graphic designers on a daily basis, it's really important to learn how to talk and connect with them on a different level. For example, if somebody sends you a file that they designed and you don't like it, you really want to be able to explain to them what about it you don't really care for. It just really helps kind of come to that end result a little bit quicker and more efficiently. So getting into the meat of today's presentation, we have the elements of design and the principles. And the elements are really kind of like the elements in the periodic table. They're your basic building blocks that all designs stem from. And then you have your principles, which take those elements, and that's kind of how they interact with one another and how they come together to give you this great design. So diving into them a little bit more, the elements of design, you have point, which is a single dot with a specific location on a surface. You have line, which is a shape that connects two or more points. You have planes, which are flat two-dimensional objects with defined borders. You have form, which is a three-dimensional object that is real or implied, which obviously graphic design is probably implied since, you know, it's a 2D surface that we design on. Color, which is pretty self-explanatory, but the three main things with color are hue, which is like the name of the color, so blue or red. Value, which is kind of like your RGB or CMYK or Pantone color value, so like the exact shade or tint of red. And then you have saturation, which is like how red is that red, basically. Then you have space, which is area above, below, around an object. And then you have texture, which is the physical qualities of a surface that are real or implied. And again, typically implied for graphic design. And moving into the principles, we have contrast, which are elements with opposite appearances placed next to one another. Emphasis, which is one area of interest given more attention than others. Variety, which are changes in size, color, or shape between design elements. Harmony, which is design elements working together to create a visually appealing outcome. Balance, which is the distribution of visual weight between design elements. And repetition, which is implied movement through multiple uses of the same design elements. Now, if it sounds like I was talking from a sheet of paper, it's because I 100% was, because words, you know, tend to make my brain a little bit. And if you go to our website, a2scommunications.com, and click on the toolbox link on the left, you can actually download this very handy sheet that I put together as well. You can have it, and hopefully it'll, you know, help you with some of that talking to designers and stuff like that. So let's talk about a few of these things. We won't talk about all of them because we definitely do not have the time for that. But one of the main ones is color. And what's so important about color is that it is instantly recognizable. Think of some of your favorite brands. If you just, you know, see that color off in the distance, you know what it is. Think about going into like a restaurant. You might be Team Coke or Team Pepsi. And if you see a red machine, that's Coke, blue, Pepsi. So just some examples on the right side here. Of logos I've helped design over the year. Each one has, you know, kind of distinct colors. One thing I thought was interesting was that the top two really use the same color palette, but they're, you know, with the green, the blue, and the gray. But yeah, and from a design standpoint, they're also very different. Even though they use similar colors, the actual color is totally different. And I think of that scene from, oh, what's the movie, The Devil Wears Prada, where they're talking about, I think it's like the cerulean belt or the blue belt, and how Andy just doesn't, she just thinks it's blue, and they just make fun of her and say, no, it's cerulean, it's not lapis, it's not whatever. So as a designer, you really notice these things a little bit more. What else is important about color is that it really conveys emotion, and color really has meaning. Like think of a stoplight, red means stop. Green means go, yellow means, caution, slow down. So the same thing goes towards design for other things as well. So for A2S, we have a few different designs. Since we're a water engineering firm, or focused on water for the most part, we put together these ads, and the top one is a bit more lively and fun and energetic, and then the bottom one is a bit more melancholy and kind of sad and really dire. And without even reading the text, you just notice that, like, think about paging through a magazine, you have a second to grab someone's attention. And so the top one, between the color and even the graphics behind the color with the hands holding the clean glass of water, it really has that emotion behind it. And then same with the second one, without reading the text, it just looks kind of sad and dreary. And really the message, if you read the text, is how important is water, and without water, life ceases to exist. I thought this was kind of funny too. The other day I was going to work, and I was behind a work vehicle for a company that sells pools and hot tubs. And so the vehicle had a wrap on it that had like abstract water, but the water was like nuclear green in color. I just couldn't help but think, like, that's what you're trying to avoid by buying like a pool or a hot tub. You don't want that algae growth and stuff. So like that color choice just seemed a little off to me. And I don't know, for me, I just kind of chuckled at it as I drove along. So where do we get some of that colors? And as a firm, we really like to use local inspiration, which really helps with authenticity. So the city of Williston a few years ago, we helped redesign their logo, and we came up with some colors. And we've always done quite a bit of work out there. So we had some of these photos already, and then we were able to go out and take some. And by sampling some of those photos, we were able to get this color palette that's really true to that area. And also Williston is very proud of their landscape out there. Obviously in their logo, they have the butte, the river, and the green fields and stuff. So it really helped sell it to them when we came up with those colors. And then speaking of colors, you really want to define them, and you want to define your primary colors, your secondary colors, and sometimes even tertiary colors. So for this example, the city of Burnsville, which is in the Minneapolis metro, they already had a logo and their primary colors developed, but they wanted us to come up with a tagline and a redesigned logo for their economic development authority, I believe. So we came up with these secondary colors for them, and they use them really well, like for icons and stuff like that. So more supporting things. If you Google online, I'm sure someone out there has come up with very exact numbers of, use your primary colors 80% of the time, use your secondary colors 20% of the time. But basically just want to make sure you use your primary colors for the bulk of your design. And then your secondary colors are supposed to be, complementary and kind of come in second, hence the name. So changing gears and talking about typography a bit, much like color, it has meaning to them. So different styles of fonts, I guess. And on the right, you can see I have 4 of the main styles separated out. There's a few more, but it gets a little bit complicated, I would say. So the first one are serif fonts, and as the name implies, serif fonts have serifs on them, which are these little like protrusions on the for what's called the letter forms. And most people say that it's easier to read in print for serif fonts or larger amounts of text, so paragraph text and stuff like that. So you see that a lot in newspapers and in books. I think before, a lot of people would say that the serifs themselves are what help this be more legible in print, but I think they switched gears, and now it's actually the different line widths within each letter form. So like, as you can see on the S, the top is a little bit thinner and then it gets thicker, and that mimics like actual handwriting a little bit more. So it's just a little bit easier to read. It's also seen as a bit more formal. You'll see serif fonts used in like invites to really nice events and like weddings and stuff like that. Moving on to sans serif fonts, again with the name, that means lacking serif. So these fonts are just pretty smooth looking in nature. These are a little bit more modern, fun. They're probably a bit better for on-screen viewing. I was actually reading an article earlier today on my phone, and it was most likely because it was white text on a black background, but they used a really thick serif font, and it was actually pretty hard to read. So I think, these general rules of usage really do come into play. So, to choose the right one is very important. And then you have script fonts, which basically means that the letters are connected. So like calligraphy or cursive kind of style. And then you have decorative fonts, which are fonts that are maybe a little bit too out there to use for everyday usage. So like maybe for headlines, they're fine. Or, you know, if you want to call attention to something, then I would use those. A pretty important rule is to limit the amount of fonts you use in a single design. The general rule is to limit yourself to 3. And I should probably back up. And there's actually a difference between typography and a font. So a font is like a font is very specific. It'd be like Arial bold size 8. That's a font. Whereas like the type is more, you know, Helvetica, like the whole name of it. So when you say limit your fonts, you still kind of want to keep that into consideration. So like if you want to keep the 3 fonts, you can still use, you know, the same basic one. So like Helvetica, but also bold and like narrow. So kind of keeping in that same class, but switching them up a little bit. And then keeping them limited just really helps you not to get super convoluted and confusing in your messaging. So then moving on to how do you pair these fonts? Well, the general rule is to pair serif and sans serif fonts. Typically it's, you know, sans serif fonts for headlines, serif fonts for text, but that's been updated a little bit to just contrast your weight and sizes. So as you can see in that middle example, the same sans serif font is used for both the headline and the paragraph text, but the paragraph text is much smaller and isn't quite as thick. And then another general rule is to avoid similar styles. So as you can see, I used Helvetica and Arial, and while they look the exact same in that example, they're technically in each one's font, but they look pretty identical. And then Century Gothic and Future is another really good example. So basically I would just never use those together because they're too similar and you really want that distinction between your font usage. And you can kind of think about it as like a website where you have different, you know, H1, H2, H3 kind of things. You want to keep that even for print design too. So like if you're putting together a handout, you want to make sure that each title is, you know, the same size, same font weight and all that, and the paragraph text is all the same. It just helps people flow through the document a little bit better. And then a deeper dive into fonts if you really want to get fun, tracking and kerning and leading. So tracking is adjusting the space between letters in an entire word or an entire paragraph of text. And then kerning is adjusting the space between 2 letters. So as you can see at the top there on the right, I have welcome spelled out, and this is exactly how this program that I'm using would normally have it. But then I took it and I tracked the entire word, and then I also kerned between the W and the E to bring them a little bit closer together. And obviously you wouldn't want to do that for like paragraph text because that would take you, you know, all day to do one book or whatever. But when you do, you know, something that's going to be larger scale, so like in logos or like on a billboard or something with limited text, you really want to do that because it just makes it look much more professional. And then leading is the space between lines of text. And the general rule of thumb here is to take the size of your font and multiply it either 1 1/4 or 1 1/2 times to get the correct size of leading. Yeah, so if you have like size 8 font, just multiply that by 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 times, and you should get the perfect ratio. So moving into imagery, the most basic thing here is that there's vector images and raster images. So vector images really take the point, line, and plane from the elements, and it's based more in math. So you can scale it as big as you want and it doesn't lose any sort of resolution. And these are like files that you would create in like InDesign or even or Illustrator. And then you have raster graphics, which are based on pixels. So the larger you make them, they could potentially, you know, lose a lot of resolution. And also you can save vector files as raster images, but, you know, just think of what is your final outcome? Like, is it going to be as large as a billboard? Then, you know, probably keep it as a vector. And then talking more about vectors, we have, you know, just some basic illustration and icons, and I could spend all day talking about that. But the main thing I would like to point out is to not mix and match design styles. And this, again, is for everything. So like from a social media post to like a full-on handout, just make sure those graphics that you're using, those illustrations, all match like in color and in style. And so I have 3 different styles of icons that I have as an example on the right. And the top ones, the ones that are just black outline, you'll probably notice are used in a lot of modern apps, like iPhones and Android phones use these a lot. And it's really important to make sure that that width of the stroke is always consistent. If one's more bold or less bold than another, thicker, thinner, whatever you want to call it, it adds more or less emphasis to each one. So just keeping that same design style is very important. And we already had a good course on photography, but just talking about this a little bit more, what I think would be the key points when coming to graphic design. Make sure your prints are high quality. Even if you're going to use it for like a thumbnail image on a website or something like that, try and retain the highest quality that you can, and keep that file. Like if you downsize it, save it as a different file, so you always have that high quality one, because you never know when you're going to put it on something larger like a poster. Also try to have a clear focal point. That kind of goes to anything within graphic design. You don't want people's eyes wandering. You want to make sure they know exactly what to look at, especially in the ad example, if you're paging through like a magazine or scrolling through social media. You really just have a second to capture someone's attention. And if they're darting around an image or a design, that you just lost them. And then authenticity. This is where the way cooler than you think comes back in. The Grand Forks EDC, this is one of their campaigns that we've helped them out with a little bit. And it's a workforce retention and attraction, there we go, see I'm bad with words, to get people to the Grand Forks region to help fill jobs and all of that. And they do an amazing job with having very authentic photos. They've went out and taken their own. They've, crowdsourced them from other people, and they've also done, like social media takeovers where they've had, even I've done one where I went out with my dog and I've taken photos of him and had a little day where we just spent posting photos, and they've had great reception on that. So it's great to see. And then flipping the script, stock photos, you really can't avoid using them. Sometimes you just don't have the perfect image, or you can't just go out and take one. I feel like people are trying to stay away from them as much as possible. So I wanted to point out a few free options that exist. So the first 3, Pexels, Unsplash, and Stock Snap. You can really use any of their photos on their websites for any purpose whatsoever. They don't really have any sort of rules or anything. You might not be able to sell merchandise with it, but just for social media posts or whatever, it's perfectly fine. And then Flat Icon and the Noun Project, they have tons of resources for icons. I think some of them you may have to pay for, but they do have a free few options as well. Now, taking some of those fundamentals of graphic design and kind of building something together. So this is a poster that I created for FargoCast Public Health. We've done a few different initiatives for them, but we're currently working on one for anti-tobacco and tobacco cessation, and this one is specifically to spot the signs for parents, like whether or not their teen may be vaping. So the first thing I thought of was like, what should the hierarchy be? So you want the title, like, is your teen vaping? Spot the signs. You want that, at the top and the biggest letters you can find, because that sets it apart from the rest. And then you kind of move on through the middle, which has smaller text and not quite as much going on. And then you end at the bottom that has a little bit bigger text, and that's kind of your call to action to visit the website. And then talking about space, space is kind of hard to describe why it's important, but it's kind of the same thing as having a focal point in images or in a design. It helps your eye kind of go to the middle, or directs your eye to what you want people to look at. And it's the same for print and also for web. You want that white space around stuff, so then it's not too cluttered. And then adding in some emphasis. So as you can see before, we just had a black and white background with a gradient overlay on top, but then we added in some full color images within circles and added some arrows, and that really makes people look directly at where you want them to. And then balance, if you draw a line down the middle, like it's maybe a bit asymmetrical, but on the right side you have 2 little images, but then the left you have a larger image, so those balance out. And then the text, there's more text on the left, but then there's more graphics on the right. But in the end, you just want to make sure it balances out nicely. And then repetition, using those same design cues. So the arrows, the circles, the color photos, it really helps draw the viewer's eye through exactly where you want them to look. You know, most people read left to right, but you can kind of change that perception based on, you know, your design and what you have in it. And then at the end, you know, it's just harmony. Everything works well together. You're kind of drawn into the middle of the photo where that girl is, because she's, you know, the darkest part of the image. And then everything around her, like it just works really well together. So some general tips and tricks. First of all, ask questions. That is like the most important thing to remember. And throughout the entire process as well. And that's also, you know, if you're just working on stuff internally or for a client or large and small scale, just ask as many questions as possible. And even if it's, you know, if you've been at your job for 20 years, it still doesn't hurt to ask questions. Or if you've worked with your client for, you know, a very long time and you think you know everything about them, it's still good to ask questions because you don't know what's changed or what kind of different route they're taking. And then here's just a silly acronym, but keep it simple, stupid. And this kind of goes back to everything. Like, only include what you need. Don't include anything extra just because there's white space. And that's been really hard with engineers in particular, perhaps. But anytime they see white space, they think of it as free real estate. Like, even if it's just 1 square inch on a handout, they want to put something there just because it, you know, they think they need to. And trying to, you know, inform them that that's not the correct way, or, you know, you really want that white space so people know where to look or draw their eye or draw attention to something else. Very important. And again, this goes back to, you know, viewers only have, you know, a few seconds when they look at some things like social media posts, if they're scrolling through or in a magazine. So keeping it as simple as possible, because you don't want someone to have to read, you know, an entire page of text just to understand what you're getting at. And then defining your brand standards. This is very important, again, internal and externally. Internally for, you know, your entire company, or even for just one project or whatever you're working on. It's really good to have a sheet that shows like what fonts you should use, what are your colors. So for example, we've done quite a few different kinds for the Fargo-Cass Public Health anti-tobacco campaign. We just did like a quarter sheet with here's some of your, you know, the font, the color, some basic imagery and how to use it. And then we've done, you know, just full sheet papers with a little bit more information, and we've done like multi-page booklets, and they have a little bit more information of like what is the tone and what is your voice behind your brand. So that's very important, because, you know, if, let's say you hire someone to work on graphic design stuff for your company or whatever, you have this document to hand them, and they know where to go with the colors and all of that. And then also internally, if, you know, somebody quits or whatever, you have this document that you can hand off to the next person, and they know exactly where to take things. And then also just avoid anything too trendy. And by this, I mean more so like current trends that are maybe not going to last very long. And especially with things that you want to stick around for a long time. So like a logo for your company or something like that, perhaps I would definitely try to stay away from anything trendy, like no trendy colors, no trendy designs. I think of like everyone that owns a Cricut lately, they all do the funky calligraphy, texty font stuff, which is super hard to read and like totally pointless unless it's for your home and like a nice little sign, totally fine. But like I would never use that in, you know, on something that'll be here like 5 years from now, because it's too trendy. So things to avoid. And then just leaving you with this, every choice you make, whether intentional or not, matters. And I thought this was kind of a fun little graphic next to it, because I guess if you're a Bison fan, maybe you would love it, but overall it doesn't look like a normal stop sign, so you might just plow right through it. I probably would. Yeah, so it's just keeping that in mind, that it's very important that no matter what you're doing, and if it's intentional or not, it's going to have some sort of implication, like color, for example. If you use the wrong color and you don't know it's the wrong color, maybe you don't know, but someone else is probably going to notice. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. And I'm really hoping there's some fun questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. We have just a couple of questions that have come in. And so if you could briefly answer them, that would be great. The first one is, they are wondering what your thoughts are on all caps.
I think the general rule is to not, just because it's too, like it's yelling and it's just a little bit too overbearing. But I tend to use that a lot to draw emphasis. So kind of depends on why, I guess.
Awesome. And then another one is, how would you navigate those in an organization that don't necessarily follow brand standards? Example, an email signature.
Oh, well, in our organization, we're kind of the brand police. It's either like, going to your IT department and saying, hey, these are our standards, we need to make sure they're implemented, or printing off like a little card for everyone to make sure, they're following those rules, and really emphasizing why using those brand standards are so important.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time, so I'll pass it over to Sadie, but I just want to say thank you so much. You really knocked it out of the park, and it was a lot of really great information. So thank you.
Thank you.